City of Canby, good evening. Welcome to the City of Canby Planning Commission hearing dated April 10th, 2023. We call this meeting to order, and please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Consent items. We have the economic opportunity analysis final findings, and we have the draft meeting minutes of February 27th, 2023 to adopt, and I'd like to see if there's any discussion items that we would like to bring up prior to calling for a motion.
Yes. On the economic opportunity analysis and findings, I don't know how we want to discuss this. I noted that in what we had here in our packet, is this what's going to be submitted to the city council?
Yes, it will be.
Okay, so I'm curious. We had quite a bit of discussion about different things, and I noticed that there was very little of our discussion was in what's going to the city council. So am I missing something, or?
Can you identify what those were?
Well, we talked about, let's see here. We can go down.
Greg.
One of the larger ones that I have starred here is number 3, and it says that provide at least 8 jobs per acre. That's the bottom of page 1. We actually talked about 12 jobs per acre. I'm curious as to why that is changed.
And I think part of this is we weren't necessarily voting with a plurality. I think we were trying to just capture whether there was agreement on the 8. I mean, we could make note of that to the council, but I didn't recall that there was plurality on 12 jobs per acre.
Well, maybe I mistaken that. I felt that there was discussion that was leaning more towards a higher number than 8. On item number 4, we discussed about tax incentives for creating things, and I got the impression that we weren't really too keen on that. I don't know that as a planning commissioner, I don't know that I would want to send that impression to the city council. In number 5, we did talk about the healthcare providers and so on, but we also talked about senior living, medical support businesses, and so on and so forth. I don't see that mentioned in here. Number 6, I'm not really sure. I'm not familiar with the Clackamas Workforce Partnership and what that was. I don't recall talking about that in our discussion. Number 7, the second bullet point there, evaluate and implement code amendments that lower the barrier to the development of middle housing types, such as plexes, courtyards, apartments. I don't quite understand what that means, lower the barrier. Do we have barriers of those types of buildings not being able to be built?
I think the objective here is to look for the balance between the jobs we're creating and middle income housing.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Number 9, we talked about fund roads and infrastructure using innovative techniques. I know we talked about a radius road system. But the Yeah, there's several items, and all three of those bullet points are kind of, I didn't really see those hitting home as to what we really talked about. Support the arts and visitation, including agra and bicycle tourism. An amphitheater, I don't remember that being part of our discussion. As a matter of fact, that's the first I've heard of that. And then down in item number 13, it talks about the Economic Development Commission and Greater Portland Incorporated. I don't know who Greater Portland Incorporated is, and I'm not really on board with hooking up with anything as far as greater in Portland seems like an oxymoron there. No mention, we talked about infill with smaller cottage housing and whatnot within the boundaries that we have now, of changing possibly a code, developing a new code so that we can have maybe some of our larger lots cut up into smaller lots for cottage type housing and whatnot. I didn't see that mentioned anywhere in here. And then we also talked about high-tech companies, ag-related companies, higher ed colleges, and so on. I didn't see that mentioned anywhere. So those are the in my read of it. I was just kind of curious as to.
These were laid out and discussed. They were in the packets, and we went through this in the PowerPoint as well. And to the point of that you would like extra text in these, we're absolutely happy to put those in there. I was assuming, based on the commentary that we received, that there was general consensus around these items that were laid out, and we did try to capture what was discussed. I think these are kind of broad brush. They're not necessarily, these bullet points may not cover this could be really long if we had every single bullet point in here. I guess the fundamental of this really is, without the detail of the bullet points, would there be consensus of the bold areas of each one of these, the 13 of these, would there be consensus of those, the 13 that were identified?
I don't think on its face, on the bold areas, nothing seems to be clashing with anything that we've talked about. It's, I think what the concern is when we do bring these details forward, you talk about the convention center and other areas of economic opportunity for the city. When do we assert those specifics? If not now, when do we assert those specifics in this process so that we ensure that none of those items get left out?
No, it's a great point.
Yeah, how broad is this?
Yeah,
that was my bigger concern.
That's really it's a broad stroke, and my apology. The intention was not to remove anything that you guys discussed. I'm not. First of all, I think generally speaking, could those items, be part of the bold areas? Could those be part of what you just mentioned? Absolutely, I believe they could be. Could we, what I would suggest as part of this is moving this forward is I'm about ready to release a staff report to the council in their packets that goes out this week. I'd like to go back through the tape, and I will identify all those elements specifically in the staff report, if that would be acceptable to you.
And you were saying the staff report accompanies this specific document?
It will, exactly. So we can go through those specifics. The challenge, I think, in part is that it was extremely broad in its discussion. We weren't going, item 1, everybody, are you done? Item 2, are we done? It was a real super broad, and they are intended to be broad. I mean, I don't think anything you said could be, just because a radius road wasn't identified, that absolutely is not something that's being precluded. Or senior living and medical support, that fits under health services, clearly does, in my opinion on this. I mean, and I think that we do a broad stroke of those. I mean, it's not that we're trying to remove anything that would be part of those general categories.
I think my thought on this is I think it's really important that the city council know what direction the planning commission is going, because I know that they don't have time to sit down and listen to all of our meetings and so on and so forth. And so I think it's important that they know
From a
where
policy
what
level.
we're thinking about, where we're going.
And I 100% agree with that. And so maybe the lesson learned here is I should be going through systematically, because this is the beginning of many of these, and like taking that time and saying, do I have this right? You know,
I guess, because when you read through this, there's certain things that you're specific on, and then there's other things that you're more broad.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, first of all, on number 3, the at least 8 jobs per acre, we were at 12 in that overlay zone, and that was too high. And if I remember right, I think 8 to 10 was kind of the number we should be at.
and I think
I'd be careful getting too high there.
Well, I would say there was, maybe it could be, to be fair, like there was discussion between 8 and 12, or if you're comfortable with that. And I think that if I would absolutely be happy, and this will be probably more bullet point item level, like here's what the planning commission identified, and I absolutely can go back through those. But, the intention was not to remove anything that was discussed.
No, and I appreciate that. I just, that when we say 8, and I realize the wording says provide at least 8 jobs per acre. Okay, that's the bottom end. I just think it would be fair to maybe say, we're kind of looking at 10 maybe.
With aspirations for,
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 8 to 10.
8 to 10,
8 to
okay.
10, and then like Craig said, and then it gets like in number 10, it talks about amphitheater. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I have a question.
I mean,
mark
it
there,
was,
too.
it was part of what we discussed, and I'm not wanting to,
On that Monday night, we talked about it.
I believe we went through
Was I
these.
sleeping? I don't remember that.
And they were in the
Talked about
packets.
it in passing, and it wasn't
Yeah.
anything
But
specific
again,
because we don't have plans for it. But
Yeah.
I have heard discussions that they're planning to run a series of concerts out at the fairgrounds, and fairgrounds is busy doing other things. And if the market's there and the land is there, there's a lot of ancillary business that comes along with having shows in your
No, I have
community.
no problem with having an amphitheater.
But-
Amphitheaters are
It
great.
didn't get snuck in there, though, but it
Yes,
was part of it.
and it's
Yeah.
just evaluating the feasibility for it seems to be fairly non-controversial. There'll be plenty of time to weigh in whether it's a good idea or not. I just don't think it's a good idea to rule it out. And I remember it coming up, and I thought, oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah, what I was getting at is that we go broad brush, and then specific, and then broad brush, and then specific, and that's what bothered me about this. It just seemed like it was, and none of the specifics were what we seemed to talk about.
And I think we should have probably systematically gone through perhaps each of these as just a lesson, like in context. There was a ton of information. So just from that perspective, there's a lot to digest. And so it's trying to boil that down. But clearly, I think, Commissioner Ewart, that to your point, on a policy level decision-making, when the council does go into their discussions and deliberations, they could end up possibly changing these, and that would influence future things. This is not a specific project at this point, but ultimately it will influence other policy. These policy decisions will influence other land use decisions eventually.
And so I guess, so on number 9, I sort of talked about this last time. So on the third bullet, explore and create special assessments such as local improvement districts. That's where a couple thoughts come to mind. There's local improvement districts and there's AFDs, advanced financing districts. And I think this is where we really need a strong educational piece. The developers will know what all that means, but property owners won't. And we really need to educate. As you expand the UGB, we really need to educate these property owners of what these financial mechanisms are, how they're discussed at the city level, and how they're implemented. We got stuck in both. There was an AFD put on us, and we were never brought in that discussion. You don't want to go there, believe me. So so that's another case where you've listed one thing, but there's other mechanisms. But we really need to have an educational piece.
And I think the innovative techniques, perhaps under the bold section, using innovative techniques, I mean, it could be, in what to your point would be, I think, and I'd be happy to add that in, including but not limited to.
Things such as, I would, because
Yeah, okay.
And if you could, I think adding an education piece in here is really important, not just here, but, well, I mean, we talked about that. And then I think on number 11, maybe it's, anyway, I had a note here on around number 11, number 12, but on the road infrastructure, I think we really need to emphasize, I believe, connecting downtown to the industrial park, both with roads, pedestrian, bikes. I think that's just got to be critical. And then creating the need as the growth goes out, we've got to create the need for people to want to come back downtown. And as the growth goes out, and I said this last time, you're going to have other pockets, smaller cities. We see it all over the place. Downtown will struggle. We need a reason for people to come back here to keep that thing going stronger. I think it could be strong.
And so noted. And so I would like to, proceed ahead with, in my staff report, we'll make note of these findings that we had, but I will key out, I'll go back through the hearing or the work session proceedings, and I'll key those out. And so when we go through these items with the council, I'll bring those items up specifically and say, for your consideration, these are the planning commission thoughts on the individual items, if that is acceptable to you all.
So for example, to dovetail what you're saying, so on, let's say, number 10, evaluate feasibility for a new amphitheater, comma, convention center, comma, are you saying you're going to infuse the discussion items that came up in the last one directly into these bullet points, or are you going to defer that to your staff?
I would like to put that in the staff report and then let them, take that, forward and say, on these items, these are for your consideration. This is what the planning commission weighed in on for your policy consideration, and then let them have that conversation.
Roger that. So the whole package is going to be truly representative of everything that we said here.
That's the goal.
Okay.
Normally these staff reports are fairly small. I'm absolutely happy to beef that up to dive into this further.
I think that's all.
There's some time sensitivity as well, since the hearing is on the 19th of April. So
Yep.
I would like to continue to move forward so we continue to get refunded by Department of Land Conservation and Development for the funds that they gave us in the grant.
So let's go with the low-hanging fruit. I'll entertain a motion for the draft meeting minutes February 27th.
I move to approve the draft meeting minutes for February 27th, 2023.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
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 All against? 0. So the vote is 5-0 approved for the draft minutes. Okay. So, entertaining a motion for the economic opportunity analysis final findings with a expanded staff report to accompany that final findings to be presented to City Council. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the economic opportunity analysis final findings with the additions that we've spoken about.
I second.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All against? So the ayes have it, 5-0. All right, so on to citizen input on non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and Planning Commission will make every effort to respond to questions raised during the citizens' input before the meeting ends, or as quickly as possible thereafter. Do we have any citizen input on non-agenda items? Seeing that we have nobody on the interwebs or in person that wants to speak, we'll move on to new business. New business, we have none, so we will move on to public hearings. Public hearings, we have none. Moving on then to the work session. The purpose of tonight's work session is to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to hear updates on the comprehensive plan and analysis needs assessment. In order to make the most of the short time we are given for these work sessions, public comment will not be taken. Instead, we invite public comment at all the Planning Commission's regular meetings under either of the two opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decision in a work session. Next step actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at a properly noticed Planning Commission hearing. The public is welcome to attend, although no public comments will be taken. And with that, turn it over to Mr. Hardy to present.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I think we're just checking on some presentation issue here, and I just want to confirm that we have this on the live stream. So bear with us for a moment. Just want to make sure those that are watching can see this. Looks like we're good to go. So tonight, you're going to be hearing some more about the comprehensive plan and housing update. There's a lot of moving pieces with all of this work. So I also, because we don't have any hearing items, I feel like this is a good opportunity to continue to engage the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission, as I've mentioned previously, will be involved with the code efficiency measures for housing. And so that's something that I'll talk about as well. Laney, next slide, please. So again, I've got a couple slides here on schedule that we're dealing with. This is fairly broad, and I have one after this. It's a little more specific. As I mentioned, economic opportunity analysis, which you just, the final findings that just went forward. The City Council will be hearing that on April 19 for that, and that will finish that off as our hope. Housing production strategy is going to continue into 23 and 24. We're starting the transportation system plan and the comprehensive plan update along with an urban growth boundary expansion. Next slide, please, Laney. This slide may be a little hard to read, but I just also wanted the key issues out of this is the comp plan and TSP schedule. There is an advisory, project advisory committee meeting that is up and coming. I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. But we have an advisory committee, we have the Planning Commission and City Council, and there'll be a technical advisory committee really primarily made up of staff that'll be starting after the new fiscal year. The key takeaways of this slide will be that there will be 5 public summits. They're basically large open houses that will be happening starting this summer, with one this summer, hopefully 2 in the fall, 1 in the winter, and 1 in the spring of next year. Next slide, please, Lenny. So what we're going to cover tonight is there is the Project Advisory Committee for the Comprehensive Plan and Transportation System Plan on April 13th, this Thursday, 6 p.m. There is a advisory committee group that's been formed, cross-representation of the city. We spent a lot of time kind of going through that, 20 members of that. Some of you on the Planning Commission will be part of that. There's also city council members, advisory group members, citizens, people in the community, housing and industrial representatives will be on that as well. So the public is welcome to that. That will be in the Willamette Room, 6 p.m. Just making a pitch here, April 13 for that. That will also be recorded on Zoom. It will not be live broadcast, but it will be recorded. So we'll be doing that this week. There is a couple other items I wanted to cover is tonight is Department of Land Conservation and Development coordination on housing production strategies and efficiency measures. We're going to be going through those and talking specifically about housing strategies more in detail. And then we'll continue our conversation either April 24th or May 8th on those planning commission, depending on other hearing items that will be coming to you. So just kind of recapping what we discussed before, I have a few more demographics. Some of these slides you've seen before, but there's a few new ones. So kind of the purpose and need here of looking at housing side of things, and this is, I'm kind of intermixing things a little bit. So we have the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan moving forward. Meanwhile, the housing production strategy and the housing needs analysis are also moving forward together and are being further analyzed. So just some major takeaways is the households in Canby, 342 experiencing severe rent burden, 717 households also spend between 30 and 50% of their household incomes on rent. This is another slide on home value for the home-based price that we're seeing in Canby. Median income, or the median home price of $560,000. And we'll talk more about how that relates to both demographics and incomes in the city. So this is another slide here that kind of gives an idea. If you're looking at $560,000 as a median income and you're looking on the right-hand side of different professions, you can see that that's a pretty big lift, except for the highest incomes that you see up there that are related to more the engineering to lawyer range, much more difficult for teachers, medical assistants, retail salespersons, and I would probably throw in police officers in that as well. So this is income levels in Canby, and you can see those here in terms of comparing that back to the previous table. And so about 45% of the incomes in Canby do not match up with a $560,000 home median price. Next slide. This is the age demographic breakdown of Canby, and you can see that it's relatively balanced, I'd say, at this point. I think part of that is really trying to keep the younger folks in this community here for the long run. I think that really is the objective when you look at the, especially the 20 to 54-year-old range. Those are probably more your family startups. Those are kind of critical for a diverse demographic and for the schools to be maintained. So I'm going to jump a little bit around here. These are land efficiency measures that we talked about previously, and these are things that will be coming forth to you. We do have a consultant that will be helping us through this process to develop land efficiency measures which are required for any urban growth boundary expansion for housing. Those are intended to look at things like planned unit development code updates, cottage development ordinance, mixed use overlay. Those are the three that we talked about along mixed use overlay along 99E for commercial zones. Those are intended to support the need for an urban growth boundary expansion. Basically, they're intended to look at opportunities to reduce the amount of urban expansion that's needed. So there's a lot of coordination, and I would like to help, and we had some conversations about housing production, and we did postpone the adoption of that, and there's been some reasons for that. And hopefully this will help in that analysis. So the Department of Land Conservation and Development is reviewing residential densities within the last 5 years to determine what the need for an urban growth boundary expansion and how much of a need. They will also be looking at efficiency measures, which basically are ways to increase the use of available land for housing. They'll be looking at housing strategies, and they'll be looking at the mix of housing based on Canby incomes, which I just previously showed. So there's with all this considered, there's been additional discussion with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and the broad brush here, we do not have the final outcome here, but the broad brush is there will be a reduction in the need for a residential urban growth boundary expansion in Canby. So that is part of what's being evaluated. And in order to be able to adopt a housing needs analysis and housing production strategy, we will need to know those exact numbers. So the concern about, there were some concerns, I wouldn't say it was across the board for the Planning Commission, but there, concerns are raised about expanding the urban growth boundary, and are there ways that we could reduce that? These clearly are ways that are part of that process. And they're clearly ways that the Department of Land Conservation and Development is involved with this process. So at the end of the day, that they are supportive of whatever request the City of Canby comes in with. There'll be more discussions about this on April 24th or May 8th. There's some discussions up and coming with Department of Land Conservation and Development, but I wanted to cast that a little bit broader. There's been some further refined guidance by Department of Land Conservation and Development on these items over the last 2 years, and so there's some changing like focus on their part. They used to be more aspirational on strategies, for example, and now those are becoming much more specific and measurable in the future. So that's part of this discussion, is just to keep you up to date on that piece. The part that relates back to the Planning Commission will be the efficiency measures, which are related to the urban growth boundary expansion, but the other measures are also intended to look at globally the need for how much housing there is going to be needed for accommodating population, 6,000 people roughly in 20 years. So housing production strategies, jumping into that. I'm going to take a break here for a moment. Do you have questions at this point? I've kind of covered a lot.
So just to be clear, you're saying the numbers that they were projecting of 6,000 plus people over 20,000, they're looking at revising that down.
That's based on, Laney, can you go back one slide, please?
Just want to make sure I'm tracking with
You're
you.
exactly right. So it's not necessarily, I mean, there's a process here. It's very, very challenging to do an urban growth boundary expansion in Oregon, period. And so part of that process is going through state law, which is not a roadmap per se of this is exactly what you do, but there's guidance in that process. And so there is somewhat of a process of refinement about, dealing with how do you best utilize the land that you currently have in your current urban growth boundary and city limits? How do you best utilize that before you ask for more, so to speak? Mm-hmm. That's really the gist of it. So, for example, one thing I wanted to point out is the housing mix based on income levels. The initial evaluation was looked at forecasted housing based on historic last 12 years of what we have achieved in terms of split between single family, multifamily, forecasting that forward. Then you have to match that up with income levels to be more affordable. That's the whole reason you're doing a housing needs and housing production strategy, is to be more affordable. That housing mix that ends up changing creates more housing, and therefore reduces the need for an expansion in the fundamental framework of this. So all this has to kind of jive and match up. It's a little bit of a coordinated effort with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. This may feel like it's like fairly fluid. It's not exactly fluid, but there definitely is a negotiation process involved with this. And guidance, like I said, has changed over the last 2 years. It's become more focused on looking at things more targeted in terms of your strategies and how many units are you going to produce. And some of these are hypothetical in terms of we have to look at a strategy and then how many units and how many of those would be more affordable or affordable. How many are those? And that's part of this discussion we're having with the Department of Land Conservation and Development now. But just to let you know that the numbers that we had previously noted for need will end up being reduced. I don't have an exact number, but that's the gist of it.
Thank you.
So you used the phrase negotiation process. Is that what we're negotiating with the DLCD? Is that what that is?
It really, well, they have guidance and they're trying to look at this based on state law, but some of this is, it's more qualitative in terms of the state law on some of this. And so, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't necessarily say it's negotiated, but it's within the framework of the state law, but it's something that they have a huge amount of influence on about the end of this product. And I think, just in general, on a framework basis, Oregon is not a state that looks at land supply as necessarily a measurable piece of housing affordability. I'm just going to state that flat out. It's not something that's really looked at. So they're looking at other factors like your mix of housing. They're not looking at the land base as an element. So, there's a framework for that, and that part of that is to minimize your expansion into farmland. That's really the fundamental framework of this. So as we go into this, many jurisdictions really don't ever, they don't push the limits of trying to look at the future, or they have enough land that's available. And there's a safe harbor mechanism, and you can choose that, which may come into play here as well. Safe harbor is a way to say, we'll give you a certain amount of acreage, period, which is not contested. Or you can go through your own demographics. And so that's part of this discussion as well.
So it sounds like it kind of plays into the scenario that Commissioner Ewert had mentioned before, which was what studies have been done within the current density to see where there's opportunities to put in duplex or fourplex. That
Exactly. No, to your point, I mean, the gist of that is more of that. And again, there was an assumption on like infill to, we had that full on discussion, but the other measures and strategies start to become, I think what we're going to see is an evolution process here with the state. It's not completely unfolded, but they're going to be coming back every year saying, how have you achieved what you said you were going to do?
So I guess, then just to clarify, the negotiation process is actually taking place with the LCD and the legal system as to how they make that. That's It's not Canby. The city of Canby is negotiating for a certain number.
No, we're not. We're trying to meet the state standard, and I guess maybe that's the way to say it. And the guidance on that has changed to some degree. And like I said, in terms of the housing mix, that they want us to look at a different mix, and that's fine. We were always trying to achieve more of a variety of housing types here. But what your fundamental baseline is about, are you trying to achieve based on income, or are you trying to achieve based on history of what has happened by housing product type? Those are different. They have different measurements, and they end up resulting in different amounts of land. And we have a consulting team that's involved with this. So really, it's about it's about going through that process and the metrics of that process.
So and I'm assuming that really what's driving this is the decline in population in the state. The population in the state is actually going backwards. So they're probably looking at these numbers and readjusting, saying, we don't want to eat up a whole bunch of land to.
It hasn't really been that so much. I know that is something that's been out there on the media about declining populations. The population number we have has not decreased.
They're not going to change that.
They're not, no. And the goal here is to not have to redo this again. I don't think it'd be valuable for the city to have to redo this on the city's dime, so to speak, versus the grants that we received. But we'd have to redo that if we were not able to get the housing needs analysis completed and adopted by June 2024. So there's that pressure and to get it done. I'm pretty sure that will be finished by that time. It's more about the nature of the legislative process and kind of the tightening a little bit of like if you're going to be requesting your urban growth boundary expansion, you really need to prove it out that that's absolutely needed.
So one option of this is going to be our growth, and that projected growth comes in at whatever it comes in, 6,000, 4,000, 5,000, whatever that number is. Or you mentioned a safe harbor mechanism.
There is a safe harbor mechanism. I'm not quite ready to dive into that yet, but the next planning commission work sessions, I think we will be more able to say, we might just be there. We may end up saying, okay, we're going to choose a safe harbor. Let me throw some hypothetical numbers out. Let's say, we started out at 200 acres that we thought we had, and let's say that got reduced down to 40, but safe harbor was 50.
Okay.
That's kind of that's part of this discussion.
Okay.
And that's a whole nother more detailed discussion.
So are we going to expect similar give and take for the non-residential expansion?
No, the employment side is pretty much completely different. They don't care, the state doesn't care necessarily about the employment side, other than justification for what we've done for showing, how much, what the growth is. And that's a little easier to quantify perhaps, because we know what's been 100% absorbed, in terms of, I think it's a little easier, but it really is interesting that, like, on the industrial side, the scrutiny level is much less.
And that's where we're looking for more expansion, though.
That is where the bulk of it is, and
Interesting, okay.
so it's very dynamic. I know it's interesting what you're saying, but that's it. That's how the rules are. It's like,
it is.
yeah. But housing is something that, like, it really is looked at as being something where, have you done everything you can to not need to, do your expansion? So that's really the gist of it. And so,
It's like, just, just to make sure that I understand this. So could you talk about looking at the different uses along 99E, but really what we're talking about is they're looking at the uses of the entire town.
we haven't quite got to the strategies yet, and we're going to dive into that next. But yes, it would be thematic across the entire town. But I think part of this is when you're looking at where are you going to get your most, where are you going to achieve most of your diversification of housing, it's probably in areas that haven't been built yet. Yes, there'll be some infill. I don't disagree with that. Can we encourage that? Absolutely. But a property owner needs to make that decision to say to themselves, I'm actually going to do this. And in a 20-year horizon, there'll be a lot of people that might say, no, that's something I'm not really wanting to do. But eventually it might happen. But I'm not sure if it will be in the 20-year horizon. So there is some infill. The idea is providing opportunities that don't exist there, like the mixed use, for example. You could clearly have commercial downstairs and apartment upstairs or condo upstairs. You could have a mix of that. You could have apartments and commercial on the same horizontal versus vertical mixed use. You could have both. But it's about providing the options and the variety that allow for different housing types. Ultimately, it's really about looking at the income levels in the city and trying to do the best we can to assist in providing more affordable, it may not even be affordable, but more affordable housing for those that live here. And that's really the goal. And that's kind of the whole picture here. And I think part of that is we're simply going down this path, and I think the brakes kind of got put on by DLCD. Part of that was we weren't even supposed to, which we didn't know until we were right up against sending the housing production strategy to you folks. We weren't supposed to adopt that before the housing needs analysis. That's how our contract read. Well, they went back and said, well, no, they actually have to be together, housing needs and housing production. So that causes us to, re-look at this. And so there's some refinement really that's going on here about what is that need exactly. We do, at the end of the day, want DLCD on our side, because even if there's a marginal, if it's something that's beyond safe harbor, if it's bigger than that, it's going to be potentially subject to challenge. So that's part of that. But if it's just safe harbor, then it won't be. So a lot of stuff to absorb, and so several of these topics could be a whole planning commission discussion by themselves. I'm just trying to keep all this kind of in front of you, because like the efficiency measures, those three that we talked about, do overlap into other areas. So I'm hoping that is clear between those. And so let's jump to the next one. So housing production strategies. So these strategies are also items that we've picked some of these as efficiency measures, but we also are having conversations with the LCD about the strategies, and are those strategies ones that all are measurable and have measurable attributes to them, or are they more aspirational? They're supposed to all be, whatever strategies that are adopted by the city are supposed to be implemented within an 8-year period. So the two questions are, what are the strategies going to be, and when will they be implemented? Again, all these with the objective of creating more affordable housing in the city. There'll be more discussion around these items. This is not going to be something that will necessarily be part of a focus for a while, because there's still work going on with the LCD, but I'm just keeping you apprised of what the discussions will be going back into the strategies, and getting some additional clarification from DLCD on those two items about, what are their expectations around strategies, and what legislative elements are coming forward currently, and what are the metrics around those, because there's some legislation now going through about measuring strategies, and we want to make sure, one, we have enough time to implement them. First of all, which one should we choose? Do we have enough time to implement them? Because these take a while to put together. Some of these items could take 9 months to a year to put to, like the efficiency measures we're talking about. This is a long process to get all the way through. I don't know if you have any questions on housing production strategies. I wasn't intending to dive into detail on these, but just to let you know, there'll be another round or two or more of this discussion with Planning Commission. Okay. And so this is the part where we got discussion. I'm just trying to bring you up to speed. So really circling back, my hope is that two things I can give you at the next work session: updates on DLCD, more information on efficiency measures. There will be a consultant on board that we have, and they'll be part of the package and presentation. I don't have the details yet. Part of it is a sorting out process. I would say the beginning of that efficiency measures is having a general discussion around the topic, and picking up examples of other communities and getting your input on those, and then drilling that down into actual code.
I'm starting to pick up on the reoccurring themes.
Yep.
We're starting to see the same information a little, over, which is good because it's finally sinking in, at least. So I appreciate that quite a bit. And I think that'll be helpful, particularly when we onboard the two new members eventually that'll be joining the commission too. The repetitive nature of it is, especially for those of us that this is all new, I appreciate it quite a bit, and it's starting to make sense.
And I'm glad it's making sense to you, and I think part of this is I wish this was more linear in some ways, where it wasn't so choppy, but it's just the nature of the process.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
On the meeting for April 19th, is that at 6 o'clock on?
That would be that's going to be at 7. It's a council.
It's a city council.
City council, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you talking 13th or 19th?
19th, yeah, for the EOA. Yeah.
Thank you. $7 p.m.
And so that would be through the council, and that would then put to closure that EOA, and that'll then form the basis of us going forward with the comp plan work.
And the 13th,
The 13th is the Project Advisory Committee, which you will be attending, Commissioner Ewert. So,
In the Willamette room.
in the Willamette room. And everybody else is welcome, public's welcome. It's a pretty big room. That will again be a Zoom recorded meeting, so, but not live broadcast.
and that is at 6 o'clock.
It's at 6 o'clock, yep. And that will be the beginning, really largely focused on the community outreach piece of that as the first meeting. So like, what does that look like? How is the outreach happening? Are we missing anything in terms of outreach? Or is there something else we should be doing? Those are the discussions around that.
Okay, Don, does that wrap up the,
It does, that was it. And so I'm ready to jump into the next items of interest as you're ready.
very well, any other discussion items amongst the commission?
Thank you.
Very well, Don, take it away.
So just again, come up and coming Planning Commission, April 24. I'm hoping to have some more information on both efficiency measures and DLCD discussions. That's coming up. And then on May 8th, I believe we'll be having a five-plex project coming to you as well. There's a bunch of applications that are kind of in the hopper that have not quite got to you. They'll be probably this summer that are moving forward on that. The other item I just wanted to mention is the Planning Commission interviews. There's 3 candidates. Crossing my fingers that we will interview them next week. I believe that we'll land on a date for that, and a selection is my hope next week. 2 slots, 3 candidates, 2 slots, so.
Outstanding. Anything else to add?
No, that was it.
Okay, moving on to items of interest from the Planning Commission. Commissioners, anything?
I just have a procedure question. So there's the meeting on the 13th and it's open to the public. How is the public made aware of that?
Great question. I don't have an answer for that right this moment. Let me check with Jamie Stickle or, and I'll
I
let you.
haven't seen anything in the paper. I'm just curious.
Yeah, and I wish I should know that, but
Okay.
yeah.
One item that got touched on just ever so briefly in the previous Planning Commission meeting was the question about upcoming joint sessions with City Council. Is there an effort that we can put forward to kind of formalize or forecast over the next 6 months our desire to have, anywhere from 3 to 5 different joint session opportunities with them? Particularly as this gets a little bit more hot and heavy.
Absolutely, and I don't have the timing specific, and there's a lot going on with scheduling out. And I mean, I think the first thing is just the planning, the comprehensive plan piece by itself is a lot. I think it would be invaluable to have those joint sessions. I think they provide a lot of value, and they get to hear back and forth on those. I would say that we probably will have more information on the timing of those going more into the fall is my sense, but I will need to circle back on that.
Correction, so between now and next summer, maybe half a dozen pre-planned out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just saying, like, if there was one that we had as an update, I'm thinking fall. I mean, like, I'm just kind of looking at near term, but yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other items? Very well. With that said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Efficient.